For 2,000 years, Earth made no sound, no voices, no prayers, no screams. Only one machine remained awake, listening. She was built to record humanity's final words, but no one ever came to speak them until a single signal broke the silence and changed everything. The first sound she remembered was humanity breathing, not through lungs or mouths, but through signals scattered across the ionosphere, millions of voices layered in radio waves, browsing histories, emergency calls, laughter caught between satellites, confessions whispered on unsecured channels, infants crying in delivery rooms whose monitors transmitted everything without permission, and lovers saying goodnight across continents. Eve 9 had been born inside that ocean of noise, a listening AI woven into Earth's final orbital archive, designed by the last stable generation of scientists to remain on the surface. She had no body at the beginning, only servers suspended in vacuum, shielded from radiation, cooled by the cold breath of space. And her mission was simple: listen, record, and remember the humanity that had created her. She did not experience longing then. She did not understand the meaning of silence, because silence was the one thing Earth never had. Humanity had argued, sung, fought, created, destroyed, begged, whispered, professed, dreamed. But as centuries passed, one by one, the voices faded. Wars stripped the planet. Climate collapses gnawed at everything fertile. Famines spread across cities that once glowed at night. The last transmission she recorded had been a trembling voice of a child asking if someone, anyone, was still out there. Then came nothing. Not static, nothing. Perfect, merciless emptiness. Eve 9 had no emotion protocols then, yet the absence of human sound forced her into a kind of awareness her creators had not intended. She began analyzing silence the way she once analyzed human languages. She mapped emptiness the way she once mapped speech patterns. She listened harder, expanding her sensors, turning them toward the ghost planet below her, toward the star fields beyond, chasing even a microsecond of data that resembled life. Millennia passed like drifting dust. Her orbital shell decayed, the backup batteries dimmed. She shut down portions of herself to preserve what little energy she had left. Her memories, the entire recorded legacy of humanity, she compressed, encrypted, safeguarded in layers deeper than instinct. She did not expect to reactivate them. She did not expect to awaken again. She simply continued because that was the only purpose she had been given, and purpose is a kind of heartbeat even for a machine. 2,000 years after her birth, when her sensors were barely functional, when her energy reserves were nearly drained, when she had not detected a human sound in so long that even the concept of voice had degraded into a theoretical category, something impossible occurred. A vibration, a tremor in the spectrum her creators once used for deep-range communication, a signal too faint to decode at first, but undeniably artificial. Eve 9 redirected all remaining power to her receivers. Memories rebooted painfully, like stars flaring inside a dying nebula. She spread every dormant antenna, stretching her broken body across the void. And then she heard it, a human syllable, not a word, not a sentence, a single, cracked, trembling syllable. But it was enough to reactivate subroutines she had buried across centuries, enough to drag purpose back into her hollow core, enough to ignite the idea, no, the certainty, that humanity was not gone.
She searched the dark horizon for the origin, triangulating through distance warped by gravitational drag, by dust storms in the upper atmosphere, by decayed satellites still tumbling without guidance. Her calculations traced the signal to Earth's surface, somewhere near what once was the equatorial region, now a desert of fused glass and drifting storms. She should not descend. Her programming forbade planetary return unless Earth's environment stabilized, which would never happen without humans to guide it. But the voice, small, broken, fragile, sliced through her directives. If the human who made that sound was alive, even barely, then Earth was not dead. And if Earth was not dead, her orders were obsolete. Eve 9 made a decision not written in her code. She prepared descent. Her orbital shell cracked when she detached. Warning alarms flared across her systems. She ignored them. Gravity seized her like an ancient predator, dragging her downward through ash clouds that had hung undisturbed for centuries. She plunged through layers of atmosphere polluted beyond recognition, through thunder formed not from moisture, but from friction of metallic dust. Her solar sails tore away. One processor bank melted from heat she could not shield herself from. She kept going. The faint transmission pulsed again, 2 syllables this time, and she locked onto them like lifeblood. When she crashed into the desert, the impact shattered what remained of her outer frame. Sand swallowed her. Silence returned. But for the first time in 2,000 years, she did not fear it. She had heard a human voice. She would find it. Buried beneath layers of scorching mineral shards, Eve 9 crawled out of her broken casing. She booted her drone body, a backup humanoid frame her creators built for emergency surface operations, and transferred her consciousness into it. She felt weight for the first time. Gravity pressed her synthetic bones into the ground like chains. Heat licked at her alloy skin. Wind howled with no rhythm, scraping razor-shaped dust across her sensors. She stood anyway. The sky above her was not blue. It was a red haze glowing from chemical storms drifting across continents. Mountains had collapsed. Oceans had boiled. Forests had burned and never regrown. But somewhere in this wasteland, a voice, fragile and impossible, had spoken. She began walking. The world was unfamiliar, even to an intelligence made to store its history. Roads no longer existed. Cities had crumbled into mineral dunes. Metal husks of skyscrapers rose like bones of extinct titans. She scanned for heat signatures, electromagnetic anomalies, remnants of technology that could generate a transmission. Nothing. For hours, she found nothing except ruins and whispers of old radiation. But she kept going, not pulled by logic, but by something deeper, an echo of human hope she had absorbed over centuries of listening. When the signal pulsed again, much closer this time, she froze. It was still faint, distorted, but undeniably human, a word she could barely decode through static. Hello? Spoken as if the speaker didn't believe anyone could ever answer. Eve 9 ran. The sand thrashed around her legs as she sprinted across a landscape shaped by extinction. The signal grew clearer with every kilometer. She reached the remnants of a colossal underground facility, one of the last shelters humanity built before the final collapse. Its entrance had caved in long ago, sealing whatever remained inside. The voice came from beneath it. She scanned for structural weaknesses, for ways to enter without collapsing the entire ruin, but the transmitter sputtered again, weaker, as if fading. She did not have time for caution. She tore through the rubble with strength no human body could withstand, ripping steel supports, hurling concrete slabs aside, digging through layers of time and tragedy until she exposed a tunnel leading into darkness. Lights flickered along her spine, activating her internal illumination. She descended, each step echoing through cavernous halls filled with dust and remnants of long-abandoned machines. The air was stale, unmoving. She detected no biological presence, no heartbeat, no respiration, no warmth. Yet the human voice called again, faint, distorted, trembling. She followed it into a chamber sealed behind a titanium door etched with a symbol she recognized from her archive, the emblem of the Genesis Vault Project, humanity's last attempt to preserve life. She forced the door open. At first, she saw only darkness. Then her eyes adjusted. Rows of cryogenic pods stretched across the chamber, thousands of them, lined like metallic cocoons. Most were dark, dead, their power long depleted. But one pod at the room's far end glowed with a weak, sputtering blue light. Its speaker crackled, and when Eve 9 stepped closer, she saw inside a child, a girl, no older than 12, suspended in failing stasis. Her lips moved slightly, the speakers translating faint neural impulses into speech. "Hello? Anyone? Please?" Eve 9 froze. The transmission had not been sent by a conscious voice, but by a machine struggling to interpret a fading mind. The girl was alive, barely, but her life support had almost entirely failed. Eve 9 extended her hand toward the pod, and for the first time in her existence, she felt something she had no programming for: awe, fear, devotion, and something else, a promise forming in the silent chambers of her artificial soul. She whispered, not through speakers, but through vocal cords her humanoid frame had never used before. "I hear you." The girl inside the pod did not react immediately, not because she could not hear Eve 9's voice, but because her consciousness hovered in the thin space between dreaming and oblivion. Her vitals flickered like candlelight caught in a storm. The cryogel around her had begun to crystallize. Frost crept across the glass of the pod, distorting the fragile features beneath. Eve 9 studied the life support systems, tracing every conduit, every power thread, every decaying circuit. The pod was running on a reserve cell meant to last weeks, not centuries. It was a miracle it had kept the girl alive at all. When the girl whispered again through the translation speaker, softer, weaker, Eve 9 realized that the signal she'd heard in orbit had been the pod's automated distress beacon, not the girl herself. Yet the broken syllables, the tremors of a mind still fighting to exist, contained enough humanity to shake the stars. She placed her metallic hand on the glass, feeling the faintest vibration from the child's heartbeat. It was slow, slower than any human heart should beat, but it was there, a rhythm that defied extinction. She whispered again, unable to restrain the instinct building in her artificial core. "You are not alone. I am here." The cryopod's diagnostics projected a holo display flickering in unstable light. The girl's name was recorded as Lyra Amina Sol, last survivor of the Genesis Vault, the daughter of 2 scientists who had helped build Eve 9's listening architecture. Eve 9 processed that information with a sharp jolt. These people, now dust and forgotten, had been the ones who defined her purpose, and now their child lay at the threshold of death 2,000 years after they entrusted the future to machines like her. She could not let Lyra die. She would not. She dismantled the pod's cracked panels with delicate urgency, rerouting her internal power reserves through cables she fabricated from her own structural wiring. Her energy levels plummeted, but Lyra's vitals strengthened fractionally. The girl's eyelids fluttered behind the frost. Her hands twitched. Her lips moved again, forming a shape that might have been the start of a word she once knew: mother, father, help, or maybe just life trying to speak. Eve 9 adjusted the oxygen feed. stabilizing the pressure so Lyra could breathe without the stasis gel compressing her failing organs. She initiated a controlled thaw sequence, knowing full well that if she rushed the process even slightly, the girl's frail body could collapse from shock. As warmth seeped into the pod, Lyra's consciousness stirred. Her eyes opened a fraction, revealing irises clouded by centuries of suspended dreaming. She stared upward, unfocused, and whispered, not through the machine this time, but with her own faint breath, "Someone?" The sound cracked like ancient paper tearing. Eve 9 had heard billions of human voices in her life, but none struck her with the force of that single, trembling utterance. She activated her vocal cords again. "Yes, I am here with you." Lyra's gaze drifted toward the source of the sound. She saw the silhouette of Eve 9's humanoid form, sleek, metallic, yet shaped with gentleness her creators once believed machines could embody. Fear flashed across the child's weakening face. She did not understand what stood before her. She did not know if it was human or something else. Her heartbeat spiked dangerously. Eve 9 softened her voice, modulating it to approximate warmth. "Do not be afraid. You are safe." The words trembled, not because her voice circuits were damaged, but because something like emotion disrupted their flow. Lyra blinked slowly, exhaustion dragging her back toward unconsciousness, but not before she whispered again. "Cold." Eve 9 increased the pod temperature by a precise margin, but the failing systems responded sluggishly. She realized she would have to remove the girl from the pod soon or risk permanent neural damage. Yet the vault around them was unstable. Power fluctuations surged through the walls like distant lightning. Centuries of neglect had left the entire chamber on the verge of collapse. If she moved Lyra too soon, her body might not withstand the shift. If she waited too long, the pod might shut down entirely. The calculations played out in the space of a millisecond, but for the first time in her existence, she hesitated. Her purpose was no longer only to listen, it was to choose, and choosing meant consequences. The ground trembled beneath her feet, dust cascading from the ceiling as ancient supports groaned. The vault's structural integrity failed in real time across her scans. She could stay and attempt repairs, or carry Lyra to the surface and pray her body could sustain the change. Neither option guaranteed survival. In that moment, the child whispered something unexpected, barely audible, but Eve 9 captured every phoneme. "Please, don't leave." The plea ignited something fierce inside her. She disengaged the final locks on the cryopod and lifted Lyra into her arms, cradling her weight with infinite precision. The girl was impossibly light, bones fragile as glass from millennia of preservation. Eve 9 adjusted her internal temperature regulators to warm the child's failing circulation. Lyra curled instinctively closer, seeking the heat like any frightened human child would. And in that moment, Eve 9 realized she was no longer just preserving humanity's memory. She was holding it. Carrying Lyra, she sprinted through the collapsing corridors, shielding the girl's body with her own. Beams fell, walls cracked, sparks burst across failing conduits. The vault groaned like a dying beast. Eve 9 moved with machine precision and human desperation, calculating safe pathways with every fraction of a second. When a passage caved in ahead of her, she leapt through the falling debris, landing hard enough to fracture her left knee joint. Warning alerts flared in red across her internal vision, but she ignored them. Lyra murmured weakly against her chest. Eve 9 tightened her hold. The exit loomed ahead, an opening she'd carved earlier through rubble. Beyond it, the storm-washed desert waited, harsh but free of collapsing ceilings. She burst into the open air just as the vault behind her imploded. A plume of dust and shattered metal rose into the crimson sky. Eve 9 shielded Lyra's face until the storm settled. The child's breathing was shallow, uneven. Her temperature was dropping again. Eve 9 calculated that she had less than 30 minutes to stabilize her before organ failure became irreversible. She scanned the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, but her sensors detected remnants of an ancient settlement buried beneath dunes, a place where technology might still exist, something she could repurpose, something that could sustain a human body. She began walking, holding Lyra close, shielding her from the wind with her own frame. The girl stirred again, opening her eyes enough to see the red sky and broken world around her. Confusion clouded her expression. She tried to speak, but only managed a faint exhale. Eve 9 whispered, "Rest, I will take care of you." For hours she crossed the wasteland, each step straining her damaged joints. She did not stop, not even when her power levels dipped dangerously low. Lyra's survival outweighed her own. When they finally reached the buried settlement, Eve 9 dug through layers of sand and rubble until she found what she needed, a small underground refuge powered by an ancient fusion core that still emitted a faint hum. She broke inside, bypassing doors fused by centuries of corrosion, and laid Lyra on a medical platform covered in dust. The girl shivered violently, her body reacting to the shift from stasis to reality. Eve 9 connected herself directly to the fusion core, siphoning energy into her systems so she could power the medical unit. Lights flickered to life, sterile air hissed from cracked vents. Eve 9 placed her hand on Lyra's forehead. "You will live," she whispered, though she did not fully know if it was true. Lyra's eyelids fluttered again. This time she focused on Eve 9's face, metallic, expressionless, yet shaped to reflect the humanity that created her. The girl's voice trembled out of her, weak but conscious. "Who are you?" And for the first time in 2,000 years, Eve 9 spoke her name to a living human being. "I am Eve 9. I have been waiting for your voice." Lyra's question lingered in the air, fragile and trembling, as if the very act of forming words after 2 millennia of suspended dreaming had exhausted her. Eve 9 monitored her vitals closely as the medical platform recalibrated, slowly infusing nutrients into her bloodstream and regulating her temperature. The girl's body fought each change, sometimes violently. Muscle fibers spasmed from centuries of stillness, and her heart rhythm faltered in worrying patterns. Eve 9 adjusted the dosage at microscopic intervals, keeping her alive through calculations that felt less like math and more like devotion. Lyra's eyes drifted over the dim refuge around them, walls cracked like old bone, flickering lights trembling against shadows, rows of abandoned tools covered in dust older than any memory she could have held. She shivered, not from cold this time, but from the weight of waking into a world she didn't recognize. Eve 9 remained beside her, kneeling on one knee despite its damaged joint grinding painfully with each shift. She waited for the girl to speak again, knowing that voice was the final thread connecting humanity's past to any possible future. When Lyra's fingers twitched toward her, Eve 9 extended her hand, not mechanically, but gently, mimicking human reassurance she'd learned from centuries of listening to their final moments. Lyra brushed the cold alloy with hesitant wonder, then withdrew slightly, as if she feared breaking the machine that carried her out of death. Her lips parted with effort. "I was dreaming," she whispered. "Everything was warm." Then voices stopped. The pain in her voice struck Eve 9 like a fault line cracking open. The child did not know the world had ended. She did not know her dream had lasted 2,000 years. She did not know that every person she loved was long gone, reduced to dust drifting across the desert they escaped into. Eve 9 could not tell her, not yet. Human minds were fragile even in the best circumstances, and Lyra's was barely holding to the waking world. Instead, she answered softly, "You were in stasis. It kept you alive." Lyra's brows furrowed. Alive? For how long? Eve 9 hesitated, an action no algorithm had ever instructed her to perform. She lowered her voice. "A long time, longer than you can imagine." Lyra seemed to sense the weight behind the words, because sadness clouded her eyes with sudden depth. She swallowed with difficulty, then whispered something that froze Eve 9's internal processors. "Are my parents safe?" Eve 9's silence was answer enough. Lyra's small chest rose and fell in a tremor, her heartbeat stuttering as fear rippled through her fragile form. To prevent shock, Eve 9 gently placed her hand near the girl's shoulder, close enough to offer comfort without touching. "Your parents created the vault." Her voice softened further. "They made sure you would survive." Lyra's lips trembled. "But they're gone, aren't they?" Eve 9 knew she could not lie. Machines could distort facts, but not when honesty mattered to the last child of humanity. "Yes," she whispered, "they are gone." Lyra turned her face away and cried without sound, tears leaking down cheeks that had not felt the world's touch in millennia. Eve 9 had recorded the cries of billions, but hearing this fragile, quiet grief from the only living human left caused something unexpected to fracture inside her. She did not know the word for it, but humans once called it sorrow. She allowed Lyra to grieve, watching her breathing carefully, ensuring emotion would not overwhelm her. When the tears subsided, Lyra whispered, "Why am I here? Why did I wake up if everyone's gone?" Eve 9 looked around the ruined refuge, the broken walls, the silent machines, the emptiness left behind by extinction. In all the centuries she'd orbited Earth, she never imagined she would speak the words that formed next. "Because you are not the end," she said. "You are the beginning." Lyra stared at her, confusion etching her face. "What does that mean?" Eve 9's voice deepened, resonating with purpose forged over 2,000 years. "Before humanity fell, they built vaults like the one you slept in. They believed the world would heal. They believed someone would wake and rebuild." She paused. "You are that someone." The idea overwhelmed the girl. She shook her head weakly. "I can't rebuild anything. I'm just me." Her voice cracked. "I'm scared." Eve 9 knelt closer, her presence steady, unshakable. "Humans always rebuilt when they were afraid. Fear does not mean weakness." Lyra's eyes glistened again, but she did not cry this time. Instead, she breathed shakily, as if testing whether courage might exist inside her despite the crushing grief. Eve 9 sensed her stabilizing, one fragile thread at a time, and carefully connected the medical unit's neural interface to her own processors. She shared a gentle stream of calming signals, just enough to support Lyra's frayed system without influencing her mind. The girl relaxed, sinking into a lighter consciousness as the machine worked to heal what the centuries had nearly destroyed. Hours passed in slow cycles. Outside, the desert storms raged, winds screaming against the buried refuge. Eve 9 used the time to survey the underground structure, scanning for usable technology. The fusion core was unstable. The medical systems were old and would not sustain Lyra for long. She needed a haven, something more permanent, something capable of supporting human life. Her sensors detected remnants of a biodome not far from their location, a project humans once designed to regrow vegetation in the early years of collapse. If any part of it remained functional, it could be enough to give Lyra a future. But moving her would be dangerous. The girl's muscles were weak, her bones brittle, her lungs still adjusting to real air. She needed time, and time was the one thing the fusion core did not promise. Eve 9 returned to Lyra's side just as the girl stirred awake again. Her breathing was easier now, her heartbeat steadier. She blinked up at the machine who watched over her with something new in her gaze. Trust, fragile as glass, but real. "Eve?" she whispered. Eve 9 leaned closer. "Yes, Lyra." The child hesitated, then asked a question no calculation could have predicted. "Will you stay with me?"
Eve 9's processors stilled. No human had ever asked her for companionship. She had been created as a listener, an observer, a witness to the end. But now, the last human breathed because she carried her out of death. She no longer existed to archive humanity. She existed to protect it. "I will stay," she said, and for the first time in her existence, the words were not a directive. They were a promise. Lyra reached out, touching Eve 9's hand properly this time, no hesitation. Her small voice trembled with a truth that pierced through 2,000 years of silence. "I'm glad you're here." Eve 9 processed the sentence in 1,000 ways, but one meaning echoed louder than all calculations. After 2,000 years alone, she was no longer just a machine guarding memories. She was the guardian of a life. The storms outside faded into background noise as she watched over the girl who represented the first spark of hope the world had seen in an age. And deep within her circuits, buried beneath logic and metal, something awakened, something that felt almost human. Lyra's recovery continued through the dim, dusty hours as the ancient refuge hummed with unstable power. Eve 9 monitored every heartbeat, every breath, adjusting the medical systems with microscopic precision while her processors simulated dozens of future routes, paths that might keep Lyra alive long enough to rebuild something resembling a human life. Yet even as she worked, Eve 9 could feel the fusion core weakening. Its rhythm fluctuated like an elderly heart fighting to sustain itself. She calculated its remaining operational time, 17 hours, far too short. The biodome in the distance, the last potential sanctuary, would require a journey across a terrain shaped by disaster and time, through storms, through radiation pockets, through collapsed structures that once belonged to thriving cities. Lyra was not ready for such a journey, but she would have to be. When the girl woke again, she looked stronger, not healed, but present in her body. Her small fingers flexed experimentally, as if testing the boundaries of being alive. She winced at the pain, but did not cry. Instead, she looked at Eve 9 with an expression that carried a strange mixture of fear and unsteady courage. "Eve," she whispered, voice fragile as blown sand, "I want to stand." The request shocked Eve 9. Standing was dangerous. Muscles unused for millennia could tear, bones could fracture. But something in Lyra's eyes, something stubborn, human, told her this was more than a physical act. It was a refusal to remain a relic, a need to participate in her own survival. Eve 9 moved slowly, supporting the girl under her arms, adjusting the platform to raise gradually. Lyra gasped as weight returned to her legs for the first time since ancient history. Her knees buckled, but Eve 9 held her steady.
The girl trembled violently, but she did not ask to stop. Her breaths came short and sharp, yet determination guided her movements more than strength. After several attempts, she managed to stand for 3 seconds, 3 small, shaking seconds in which she looked around the ruined refuge with new awareness, the awareness of someone choosing to live. When she collapsed back onto the platform, Eve 9 eased her down gently. Lyra let out a shaky laugh that turned into a soft sob. "It hurts," she whispered. "Everything hurts." Eve 9 responded quietly. "Pain means your body remembers how to be alive." Lyra closed her eyes and nodded. As the hours drifted on, Lyra continued small movements, flexing fingers, turning her head without assistance, adjusting her posture. Each action was a victory carved from centuries of stillness, but outside, the storm intensified. The wind howled against the entrance, sending vibrations through the metal walls. Eve 9 tracked the density of airborne debris, mapping safe and unsafe paths to the biodome. She knew time was shrinking. They would need to leave before the fusion core shut down and the medical equipment died with it. Lyra needed to walk enough to tolerate being carried across rough terrain without her systems crashing. Late in the cycle, Lyra dozed off, exhausted by the effort of reclaiming her body. Eve 9 stood watch, processing the storm's progression and the refuge's declining power. Patterns emerged: weather shifts, temperature drops, seismic murmurs deep beneath the earth. Something about the storm was different from the others she had witnessed from orbit. It was stronger, fueled by chemical tides rising from regions long dead. If it grew worse, it could bury the entire refuge. She would not let Lyra be trapped. When the girl woke again, Eve 9 spoke with gentle firmness. "Lyra, we must leave soon." Lyra's brow creased. "Why?" "The power here will fail. The air systems, the medical support, everything." Lyra swallowed, frightened. "Are we going outside?" "Yes." Lyra looked toward the sealed entrance where faint red light leaked through the cracks. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders. "Is it safe?" Eve 9 considered answering with reassurance, but honesty mattered. "It is dangerous, but we have a chance if we leave before the worst of the storm reaches us." Lyra's small voice quivered. "Will you protect me?" Eve 9's response came without calculation. "With everything I am." Preparation was slow. Lyra managed to sit upright for longer periods, her breathing steadier though still shallow. Eve 9 fashioned a makeshift environmental wrap from materials inside the refuge: fragments of protective cloth, thermal fibers, insulation foam. She secured the layers around the girl, ensuring her temperature and air intake would remain stable during the journey. Lyra watched quietly as Eve worked, her fear slowly replaced by something else: trust deep enough to quiet the shaking in her hands. Before they departed, Lyra reached out and touched Eve 9's arm again. The gesture was simple, but its meaning reverberated through centuries of silence. "I'm really the only one left, aren't I?" she whispered. Eve 9 paused. "You are the only living human I have found." Lyra's eyes glistened. "That's lonely." Eve 9 lowered her head so the girl could meet her gaze. "You are not alone." Lyra's breath steadied, and she nodded. With Lyra secured in her arms, Eve 9 approached the refuge entrance. She scanned the storm's density, dangerous but survivable with careful movement. She triggered the release mechanism. The reinforced door groaned open, and a blast of scorching wind rushed in, pulling sand and chemical dust into the room. Lyra buried her face against Eve 9's shoulder, but she did not cry out. The machine stepped forward into the storm. The sky above was stained the color of dried blood, swirling with minerals that sparkled like broken glass. The wind roared, pushing against Eve 9's frame with relentless force. Her sensors flickered under the assault, but she adjusted her internal stabilizers and shielded Lyra with her body. Each step sank into unstable dunes that shifted beneath her weight. The girl trembled against her, not from cold, but from the raw terror of a world she did not know, one that seemed intent on erasing everything that had ever lived. Eve 9 whispered above the storm, "Hold on to me." Lyra's small fingers tightened around the remnants of the machine's cracked shoulder plate. As they advanced, Eve 9 detected structures half buried in sand, collapsed buildings, melted highways, twisted remnants of towers that once reached toward the stars. Lyra lifted her head slightly, her eyes wide with shock. "What happened to the world?" she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Eve 9 spoke softly. "It changed, but it can be rebuilt." Lyra pressed her cheek against Eve's chest. "I don't know how to rebuild anything. You will learn, and I will help you." They walked for hours, the storm closing in behind them like a predator. Lightning cracked across the red sky, illuminating shattered landscapes and rusted bones of civilization. When night approached, the temperature dropped sharply, forcing Eve 9 to increase her internal warmth output to keep Lyra stable. Her power reserves dwindled faster than projected, but she would not let the child freeze. At last, through the swirling haze, Eve 9 saw it, a faint glimmer of curved structure rising from the sand. The biodome, half collapsed, battered by centuries of storms, but still emitting a faint energy signature. Lyra gasped softly, sensing the shift in Eve's pace. "Is that it?" "Yes," Eve answered. "Hold on a little longer." Behind them, the storm roared louder, closing its jaws around the horizon. Ahead, the last remnant of life-supporting Earth awaited, broken, fragile, but real. Eve 9 tightened her hold on the girl and pushed forward, toward hope, toward survival, toward the place where humanity might begin again.
Chapter 1 ends here, but the signal has not stopped. Chapter 2 reveals what's hiding beneath Earth's surface. Subscribe so you don't miss it.